It was 1969. And off of a little road that comes off of the San Francisco Road in South Trinidad, a most remarkable discovery was made. And that discovery was these human remains. And what was so remarkable about this was that these remains, were found by Peter Harris and the Trinidad and Tobago Historical Society just 20 centimeters below the surface of the earth, covered in shells. And when these remains were tested, they proved to be between 6,000 and 7,000 years old. Named for the little trace called Banwari, trace off San Francisco Road, they were first known as the Banwari man, and now actually we know they're more likely to be the remains of a woman between the age of 25 to 30. So she's the mother of Trinidad and Tobago. And for me, what so resonated with me about this was how come 47 years later, this truth, this reality has still not really penetrated our national mind and understanding. And it inspired me to really deeply reflect on the significance, the magnitude of this, and to realize the great depth that comes from this truth, that we live in a land of 7,000 years of human history. And that for me, that makes us take ourselves more seriously and realize we have much more depth to ourselves that goes beyond the superficiality that can so easily prevail. And so this led me to say, I need to take my camera and even more sharply focus it on what has been pushed to the margin, like Banwari, what we've overlooked and forgotten in our culture, what we've sidelined, starting with the indigenous people of this land in the contemporary expression of their life. These photographs taken just last year at the Indigenous Heritage Day in Arima, which is actually just going to take place next week. It happens every October. And to think that indigenous people from across the Caribbean and South and Central America come here every year to celebrate indigenous heritage with us. And that sense of depth to our past that we need, and I felt myself as a photographer, a responsibility to use my camera to keep bringing this aspect of our reality and heritage to the fore. And when I took my camera and I used it as a tool of investigation, as a way of conversing with history, as a living subject, it really strikes me more and more just how much we're a tapestry of old peoples, even though we're such a new nation, just 54 years of independence, 500 years of the often adverse effects of colonialism. But that with this tapestry that we are, this new formation that we are, has such deep old roots. As you see in this photograph of the Gungun masquerade that came from Africa. And you know, the Middle Passage did not erase culture and memory and language and tradition. And that still survive with us today. And the journey across the Indian Ocean and the Cape of Good Hope and across the Atlantic and indentureship did not erase culture of the people who came from India. And that these two continents, the Asian continent, the African continent, and you combine it with the culture from Europe and from the Americas, and Trinidad really is a unique place of like the four corners of the earth meet here. And that in our contemporary society, I was very interested to see with my camera, what could I find of these old cultures that survive and thrive, even though very often actually at the periphery, at the margin, sometimes very unnoticed, but the fact that we don't notice doesn't mean it's not real and alive. This photograph shows us Obatala Festival in Woodbrook, Rosalino Street in January this year. So these cultures, these rich cultures, give Trinidad and Tobago such depth. And I think that that depth gives us strength. And that diversity of culture that we have really is something to be celebrated and deeply respected, and actually can potentially be for us what builds bridges of understanding between us. Which brings me to Carnival, which is where, as many of you know, I focus my camera quite a lot. And for me, Carnival, I've recognized it to be such a sacred space. Because it's a space in which, in terms of the traditional aspects of our carnival, cultures have a way of finding expression in a contemporary form, in ways that are unique to this space. So we draw on the heritage from all of these continents, those 4 continents of Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas, and they all come together in these unique forms in our carnival. And most especially, I'm interested in the forms in carnival that have been most pushed to the side. And this is one of them, the Black Indian, which celebrates our indigenous heritage and our African heritage and the children who are the offspring of that heritage. It's the most beautiful tradition in our carnival, and only being today carried on by a few people, but thank God for them that they continue to carry it on. So that out of our carnival, which has given us those traditions, which has given us the most wonderful invention of the pan. And I like to think of the pan, even in its shape, as something that holds every single one of us in Trinidad and Tobago inside of it. We all held there. Doesn't matter, where you're from, where you live, how much money you make, what color, what religion, the pan holds us all. And in that carnival culture that has given rise to these unique forms, to the Black Indian, to pan, to jab, we see that very often the stereotype is that it's only the elders that are really interested in traditional forms. And the camera tells me that is not so. I see so many young people keeping our culture alive. Young people who are the living bearers of culture. And they're not seeing culture only as something to be preserved, but something to be continually reimagined. Because culture is not fossilized. It's alive, it's living. And I'm so heartened by the young people of this country who see it as their responsibility and they shoulder it to carry the culture forward. And for me, therefore, I want to take my camera all the time and highlight the work of people in culture to show the beauty, the depth, the resilience, the energy, the vitality of our culture. And part of that vitality and energy comes from, I find, one of the most beautiful things I've found is the family in culture. And we underestimate just how much culture resides in what is passed on from one generation to the next in culture, as in this photograph. There are 4 generations present in this photograph. The 4th is in the drum. The drum on the left, that colored drum, the man who is playing it, when he was 6 years old, his father died, and he inherited his father's drum. And through that drum, he kept the ancestral memory alive, his culture alive. And he passed it on to his son in the middle, who has passed it on to his son at the end. 4 generations. And how many other families there are like this one in Trinidad and Tobago. And that intergenerational transfer of knowledge about culture is part of what is so beautiful and to be found and to be celebrated. And that's what I look for with my camera, to find the beauty, the humanity in the faces of Trinidad and Tobago through the culture that we express and through the deepness of the heritage that is our inheritance. And that brings me to these little boys. Earlier this year, I was in Freeport, and we were doing some work there, and I saw them under a street light, and I just thought, wow, they were so beautiful. I quickly took their picture. And what you're not seeing in this photograph is that they were looking on at their neighbors playing tambu bambu. And it was the most wonderful tambu bambu I had ever seen and heard. They were also dancing the bongo. And for me, these young men, these young boys, symbolize the future. They symbolize the present. And with these children, I said I must really always look back at their faces when I might be, feeling a loss of heart sometimes. I need to keep looking at their faces. Let them really penetrate into me, because they remind me of, the UNESCO has a beautiful statement in its Memory of the World program that we must safeguard against collective amnesia. They are the children of Banwari. We mustn't forget the depth of our heritage. And at a time when we are very concerned, and rightly so, about the future of the economy and about the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, we're very concerned about these things. We need to be equally concerned about our culture and our heritage. And we need to ask each one of ourselves that personal responsibility. What are the deposits we are making there? What's the commitment and priority we are placing to secure for these children of Banwari and for the future generations to come the inheritance of our culture and heritage that we leave for them? Thank you.